Darkness was not silent. It breathed, it waited, it watched. The ruined mansion on the hill stood like a wounded beast, its jagged windows glimmering under the pale moon, and shadows stretching down toward the village. For years people spoke in whispers about curses and strange cries inside its walls, and no one dared to enter. Yet Emma, a young woman with fire in her heart, could not resist the pull of that forgotten place. Her late grandfather's letters haunted her dreams, filled with warnings and promises of a secret hidden in the mansion, a secret tied to her own blood. That night, unable to fight the calling, she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped into the cold, mist-covered streets. Every stone beneath her feet echoed like a warning, and every turn of the path seemed heavier than the last. The iron gates of the mansion rose before her, twisted and broken, their rusted jaws resistant as she pushed them open. Inside the courtyard, the once beautiful garden was nothing but skeletal branches reaching for her like desperate hands, and the smell of damp decay clung to the air. She paused, staring at the cracked stone steps leading up to the grand door, her chest tight with fear and anticipation. The wooden door groaned as she forced it open, and the darkness inside swallowed her lantern light whole. The silence was alive, pressing against her ears, until she noticed a strange carving above the fireplace, a spiral crossed with a single line, the same mark her grandfather had drawn in his letters. Her breath quickened as she touched the carving, her fingers trembling on the rough surface. Then from the staircase above came the sound of slow, heavy footsteps, deliberate and steady. Emma froze, her heart crashing against her ribs. She had come alone. Fear was not distant, it was breathing close, wrapping itself around Emma as she stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, her lantern trembling in her hand, while the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps rolled down from above. She wanted to tell herself it was nothing more than the groan of old wood or the tricks of her imagination, yet the rhythm was too steady, too alive, as if someone unseen was waiting just ahead. Her chest tightened, but she forced her shaking legs to move, each step up the staircase creaking like a scream, and with every rise the footsteps seemed to retreat further, pulling her deeper into the heart of the mansion. The air thickened, the smell of dust and rot choking her throat, while cobwebs brushed across her face and arms as if invisible fingers were testing her resolve. She reached the landing, where a corridor stretched into darkness, the lanterns glow painting fragments of ruined walls and torn carpets. The portraits hanging on either side were faded by time, yet their painted eyes seemed sharp and accusing, following her with unyielding stares. The footsteps returned, soft dragging steps echoing from the far end of the corridor. She froze, raising her lantern higher, its flame flickering wildly, and in that brief and steady light she saw it, a shadow at the very end, hunched and still, like a figure carved of darkness. Her heart thundered. She blinked once, and the figure was gone, leaving only the emptiness of the hall. The silence that followed was heavier than sound, pressing against her ears until a sudden thud rattled the old door to her left as though struck from inside. Emma staggered back, nearly dropping her lantern before remembering her grandfather's words written in his last letter: "Trust the marks, they will guide you." Swallowing her fear, she turned away from the door, and her eyes caught the faint etching of the spiral symbol scratched on the wall, leading further down the corridor. She followed slowly, her steps uneven, but her will firm. Her mind screamed to turn back, but her heart burned to know what lay hidden. She reached the end of the corridor, where another stair descended into the belly of the house, and there, again, the symbol carved deeper and clearer into the stone. She inhaled sharp and long, and then descended, lantern shaking in her grasp as the mansion seemed to close its jaws around her, waiting for its secret to be unveiled. Silence was not empty, it was alive. It moved with Emma as she descended the narrow staircase into the belly of the mansion, her lantern struggling against the weight of the shadows. pressing in from every side. The stone steps were cracked and damp, the air so heavy with moisture that each breath felt stolen from the darkness itself. The deeper she went, the louder her heartbeat became, until it seemed to echo through the walls like a second drum, guiding her toward something unseen. At the bottom, she entered a vast chamber carved into the rock beneath the house, its ceiling lost in shadow, and its walls lined with shelves that once held books and relics, now covered in dust and rot. The spiral symbol gleamed faintly in the lantern light, carved again and again into stone, as if her grandfather had left a trail. With desperate hands, Emma raised her light higher and saw a wooden table at the center of the room. A map stretched across it, weighed down with rusted keys and broken glass. On the map was drawn the outline of the mansion, and beneath it a network of tunnels winding like veins into the earth. Her breath caught, for this was no simple house, it was a labyrinth, and she realized now why her grandfather had written that the secret was buried deeper than walls. She reached for the map, her fingers brushing its surface, when the air shifted, a low sigh sweeping through the chamber, as though the mansion itself exhaled, and in that breath her lantern dimmed. Shadows swirled across the walls, forming shapes of figures half seen, their faces twisted in sorrow. Emma stumbled back, clutching the lantern to her chest, whispering courage to herself. Her eyes fell then on a chest at the far corner, half hidden under rotting cloth. She forced her legs forward, pulled away the fabric, and touched the wood. The lock was broken, as though someone had forced it open long ago. Inside lay scattered pages covered in strange handwriting, and among them a locket of tarnished silver engraved with the same spiral symbol. She opened it and found a faded picture of a woman, her grandmother's face smiling, yet her eyes sharp as though guarding something. She gasped, for her grandmother had never spoken of the mansion, never spoken of secrets, yet here was proof she had known. She lifted the locket, and as she did, the ground beneath her shuddered, a tremor running through the chamber. The shelves rattled, dust falling in heavy clouds, and from the farthest tunnel came a low rumble, not of earth but of footsteps, many footsteps moving closer. Darkness was not still, it stirred, it pressed closer with every heartbeat. As Emma clutched the locket in her hand and stared into the yawning mouth of the tunnel, from where the sound of countless footsteps rolled like a storm, her body trembled, yet she forced herself to hold the lantern high, its glow stretching weakly into the corridor that seemed to breathe with its own life. The walls were slick with moisture, the floor uneven and cracked, and the air carried the heavy scent of earth mixed with something metallic, like old blood. The spiral mark scratched into the stone appeared again, this time glowing faintly, as though alive, guiding her deeper into the darkness. Emma whispered her grandfather's words to herself, trust the marks, they will guide you, and with that she stepped forward. The footsteps ahead quickened, echoing louder and closer, until they seemed to come from every side. Shadows flickered across the walls, darting like figures half formed, their faces twisted with grief and anger. Emma felt her chest tighten, but she pressed on, her courage burning against the tide of fear. The tunnel bent sharply, leading into a vast cavern, lit faintly by cracks in the rock, where pale moonlight slipped through. From the ceiling hung chains, rusted and broken, and at the center of the cavern stood a stone altar, covered in carvings of the spiral symbol. Emma approached slowly, her lantern shaking in her grip, and as the light touched the altar, she saw more pages scattered upon it, their ink smeared, yet still bearing her grandfather's hand. The words spoke of a curse bound to the mansion, a curse tied to their bloodline and guarded by the watchers who dwelled in the shadows. Emma turned sharply, for behind her the footsteps had stopped, replaced by silence that pressed heavier than sound. She raised her lantern, but the flame flickered, nearly dying, and in that instant she saw them standing at the edges of the cavern, figures tall and thin, their eyes burning faintly with pale light. Their presence was suffocating, their gaze unblinking, as though they had been waiting for her. All along her knees weakened, yet she held the locket to her chest, whispering, "I'm not afraid," though every beat of her heart betrayed her. The watcher stepped closer, their movements slow, deliberate, and the cavern shook as if the earth itself trembled with their awakening. Emma knew she had uncovered only the beginning of the truth, and the mansion would not let her leave until the secret was fully revealed. Terror was no longer a whisper, it was a weight pressing against Emma's chest as the watchers stepped from the edges of the cavern, their tall, thin forms bending as though the darkness itself had shaped them. Their eyes glowed with a pale light, neither fire nor flesh yet, burning with ancient hunger. The air around them pulsed with cold, so sharp it cut against her skin, and the lantern in her hand sputtered, nearly extinguished. Emma tightened her grip on the locket, her only link to her grandfather and grandmother, and raised it high as if the silver charm could shield her from the growing storm. The watchers halted for a breathless instant, their glowing eyes fixed on the locket, and in that pause Emma felt a strange warmth pulse through the metal like a heartbeat, not her own. She staggered back as whispers filled the cavern, voices layered one upon another, speaking in tongues she could not understand, yet every syllable weighed heavy upon her soul. The altar behind her seemed to hum as though alive, its spiral carvings glowing brighter with every word. Her heart screamed to run, yet her feet refused to move, rooted by both terror and an unexplainable pull toward the truth. She turned slowly, her gaze falling on the scattered pages her grandfather had left, and as she lifted one trembling hand to touch the ink, she felt the watchers move closer, their steps soundless, but shaking the air itself. She read the words in silence, her lips moving with the faded script. The curse cannot be broken by fear, it can only be faced by blood. In that moment, her breath caught. She understood that her presence here was no accident, it was demanded. The watchers surrounded her now, their lightless faces leaning nearer, the cold of their presence making her vision blur. Emma held the locket tighter, whispering into the hollow air, "I will not run," even as tears traced her cheeks. The cavern trembled, cracks splitting along the walls, dust falling like rain, and the chains above swaying with a sound like distant bells. The watchers raised their hands as though commanding the earth itself, and the altar split open, revealing a staircase descending deeper than sight. Emma gasped, her body weak yet her spirit refusing to yield. She stepped toward the new path, the watchers parting as though allowing her passage. She knew this descent would bring her closer to the truth, yet also closer to the heart of the curse. She gathered her courage, took a long breath, and placed her foot on the first step as the darkness below stretched wide to claim her. Courage was not calm, it was fire burning against the storm. As Emma stepped onto the hidden staircase revealed by the splitting altar, the watchers did not follow. They stood in silence, their pale eyes fixed on her, as though testing whether she was worthy to face what lay below. Each step down was colder than the last, the air thick with the scent of earth and forgotten time. Her lantern flame shrank small and fragile, barely cutting through the heavy dark, yet the spiral marks carved into the stone walls glowed faintly, guiding her descent. The stairs twisted downward into endless shadow, and the silence pressed so tightly against her ears that she began to hear the rhythm of her own heartbeat. Like a drum echoing in a cavern, she whispered to herself that she must continue, that her grandfather had left these signs for her alone, and that the truth was waiting at last. She reached a vast underground hall, its ceiling lost in blackness and its floor covered in cracked tiles. The spiral symbol dominated the center of the chamber, carved wide into the stone and filled with some substance that gleamed faintly under the lantern light. Emma stepped carefully into the room, her breath shallow and her body shaking with every step. The air seemed to grow heavier, her chest aching with the weight of something unseen. Around the walls stood broken statues, their features eroded by time, yet their stances filled with power, each one facing inward as if guarding. The spiral at the center, Emma raised the locket high, and as its silver caught the light, the spiral on the floor began to glow brighter until the whole chamber pulsed with a faint living light. Her skin prickled as whispers filled the air, rising like a chorus of voices speaking in tongues she could not understand. She felt dizzy, as if her very blood was responding to the sound. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the broken statues seemed to lean closer, their shadows stretching unnaturally toward her. She staggered and fell to her knees, pressing the locket against her heart, and in that moment, the voices sharpened into a single word, repeated again and again: blood, blood, blood. Her breath faltered as realization struck. The curse demanded not just courage, but sacrifice. The spiral flared bright, blinding her for an instant, and in that flash, she saw her grandfather, his figure, standing at the edge of the chamber, his face filled with sorrow and warning. She gasped, reaching out, but when her vision cleared, he was gone, leaving only the echo of the voices and the growing heat from the spiral. Emma pushed herself to her feet, knowing the next step would test not just her courage, but her very life. Destiny was not a choice. It was a command written into the stones of the chamber. As Emma stood trembling within the glowing spiral, her lantern shaking in her grasp, and the locket burning hot against her skin, the whispers in the air had grown louder, no longer distant, but close, pressing against her ears until they were almost unbearable. Blood, they chanted, again and again, as though the walls themselves demanded it. The spiral beneath her feet pulsed with a red glow that throbbed like a living heart. She looked around, desperate for guidance, her eyes darting to the broken statues looming at the edges, their ruin faces seeming to sneer as if they had always known she would stand here. Emma clutched the locket, whispering her grandfather's words, though her voice cracked with fear. Trust the marks. They will guide you. She lifted the locket high, and its silver flared brighter than ever before, casting light across the chamber. And in that glow she saw another mark hidden at the far side of the hall, scratched deep into the stone wall, almost invisible in the shadows. It was the spiral again, but pierced through with a jagged line. Unlike the others, she stumbled toward it, her hands trembling as she traced the grooves carved into the rock, and as she touched it, the chanting voices fell silent for the first time since her descent. The silence was heavier than sound, pressing against her lungs until she felt she might suffocate suddenly. The spiral at her feet erupted in light brighter than flame, and from its center rose a figure shaped of smoke and shadow, tall and terrible, its form shifting like storm clouds, yet its eyes burning red. Emma staggered back, her breath frozen in her chest. The figure spoke without words, its meaning pressing directly into her mind. You are bound by blood. You cannot leave without payment. Emma fell to her knees, her strength breaking, yet her spirit refusing to surrender. She pressed the locket to her lips, whispering, I will face you even if it costs me everything. The figure reached out its shadow hand, stretching toward her as the chamber shook, dust raining from the ceiling and cracks splitting across the floor. The spiral pulsed faster, the light blinding until Emma could see nothing but red. Her body trembled, her heart screaming, yet she forced herself to step forward into the light. The shadow loomed larger, its voice thundering in her skull, and the last thing she felt before the world dissolved was the burning heat of the locket against her skin. Truth was not gentle. It was a blade cutting through every layer of fear. As Emma stepped deeper into the raging light of the spiral, her vision drowned in crimson fire, and her body trembling as though it would break apart. The figure of shadow loomed tall before her, its burning eyes piercing into her soul, pressing a command that no words could carry. Yet her heart understood the curse was bound not to the mansion, but to her bloodline, to the choices made by those before her. The whispers returned, rising like a storm around her, echoing through her mind. Blood must answer blood. Emma clutched the locket against her chest, its heat unbearable now, and as she pressed it tighter, she saw flashes in her mind, visions of her grandfather, standing where she now stood, carving the spiral into the stone, with his bare hands, his face strained with sorrow and sacrifice. She saw her grandmother turning away, hiding secrets that weighed heavier than iron their silence had built this cage, and now it had fallen upon her. The spiral blazed brighter, and the shadow figure stretched its arms toward her, its form swirling like smoke, yet solid enough to make the ground tremble. Emma fell to her knees, her tears falling into the glowing lines of the spiral, the voices chanting louder until they became one deafening roar. She cried out that she would not give her life, that she would break the chain not through death, but through defiance. Her words echoed through the chamber like thunder, shaking the very air. The shadow reeled back its form, twisting in pain as though her refusal had struck it like a weapon. The spiral beneath her feet cracked, lines of white light tearing through the stone as if the curse itself was being challenged. The broken statues along the walls began to crumble, their fragments falling with heavy crashes as the cavern seemed to fight against her decision. The locket pulsed brighter than ever, its silver surface glowing like molten fire, until Emma could no longer hold it. She dropped it onto the spiral where it sank into the light as though the stone itself had swallowed it. The ground shook more violently, the ceiling splitting open to reveal glimpses of the tunnels above. Wind roared through the chamber, carrying with it the sound of the watchers returning, their footsteps approaching like a marching army. The shadow figure screamed, its voice tearing through the air, and Emma knew the battle had only begun. She rose to her feet, her body weak, but her spirit unbroken, staring into the storm of light and darkness, waiting for what would emerge next. Hope was not steady, it was fragile like glass under the weight of storms. As Emma stood in the fractured chamber, her eyes wide with the blazing spiral at her feet and the shadow figure thrashing against the force of her defiance, the ground split further, dust and stone raining from the ceiling, and the tunnels above roared with sound. The watchers were returning, their endless footsteps echoing like drums of war, growing louder with each heartbeat. Emma braced herself, her body trembling, yet her will sharper than ever. She raised her eyes to the spiral, now cracked with light pouring through its broken lines, as if the mansion itself was bleeding out centuries of secrets. The shadow figure writhed, reaching for her again, but the light tore pieces from its form, scattering them into smoke. Emma staggered back, yet refused to fall, her chest burning with both fear and determination. She whispered to herself that she would not break, that she would carry the truth, even if it consumed her. The footsteps filled the cavern as the watchers descended, their tall, thin shapes surrounding her once again, their glowing eyes fixed not on her but on the spiral, as though they too feared its power. Their movements were slower, more deliberate, and for the first time Emma felt they were not only enemies, but prisoners bound by the same curse. The whispers in the air shifted, their tone no longer demanding, but pleading, voices layered with sorrow, begging to be released. Emma clutched her empty hands where the locket had been, her heart sinking at its loss, yet she felt its fire still burning within her blood. She stepped into the center of the spiral, the watchers drawing closer, their forms towering around her like living walls. The shadow screamed one last time and plunged into the ground, vanishing into the light, leaving only silence, broken by the endless steps of the watchers. Emma closed her eyes and raised her arms as though offering herself to whatever fate awaited. The chamber shook with a force that made the statues crumble completely, and the walls crack wider, revealing hidden tunnels that stretched into darkness. The watchers halted, their glowing eyes fixed on her as though waiting for a choice only she could make. The air grew heavier, the light brighter, and Emma realized the curse was demanding its final answer. She had walked too far to turn back now. She opened her eyes, meeting the gaze of the watchers, and spoke with a voice steady though her heart quaked. "I will face the end." The ground split wider, the spiral blazing with unstoppable energy, and the watchers stepped closer, as though ready to pass judgment. Endings were never gentle. They were storms tearing through silence. As Emma stood within the blazing spiral, her body weak, but her spirit unshaken, the watchers closed around her, their glowing eyes burning with both fury and sorrow, their long forms swaying like trees in a storm. The ground beneath her feet cracked open, streams of white fire rushing through the stone, and the chamber shook as though the earth itself was in agony. Emma lifted her face to the storm of light and darkness, her voice steady as she cried that she would not surrender her life as a sacrifice, but instead she would end the curse through her choice. The watchers halted their movements, their glowing eyes fixed on her as if her defiance had struck at the very heart of their existence. The whispers that had haunted the mansion for centuries rose again, but now they sounded different. Not cruel commands, but voices of the broken, pleading to be freed. Emma placed her hands on the spiral, pressing her palms against the blazing lines that burned her skin, yet filled her veins. With strength she felt the locket within her blood, its fire spreading through her body and pouring into the spiral. The chamber erupted in light brighter than the sun, and the watchers screamed, their voices echoing like thunder across the endless tunnels. Their forms dissolved one by one into smoke, until only fading sparks of their pale eyes remained. The shadow figure reappeared, writhing as though chained to the spiral, its body torn apart by the force of Emma's choice. It roared without sound, and then shattered into nothing, swallowed by the blazing fire. The ceiling of the cavern collapsed in places, revealing the night sky above, and cold moonlight poured into the chamber, mixing with the light of the spiral. Emma fell to her knees, tears on her face, but her heart burning with triumph. The spiral dimmed, its fire sinking slowly back into the stone until only faint glowing lines remained, etched forever as a reminder of the curse that had been broken. The silence that followed was pure and deep, a silence that felt like freedom. Emma rose to her feet, the weight of the mansion lifted from her shoulders, and the air clear. For the first time since she had entered, she looked toward the path back to the surface, knowing the watchers were gone, and the house would no longer hold the chains of blood. Her grandfather's voice seemed to echo gently in her heart, not in words, but in peace, and her grandmother's hidden sorrow was gone, replaced by release. Emma walked through the broken chamber and into the tunnels, the dawn light beginning to creep through the cracks. She stepped out into the world above, breathing fresh air, her body weary, but her spirit unbroken. She had faced the curse, and she had ended it. The mansion now stood silent, its power gone, its shadows lifted forever.